Give us a sense. We follow these presidential tweets really every single day. How much of this is according to some thought-out plan, and how much of it is improvised? When we get something like this tweet coming from Air Force One saying, you know what, we told you we're going to sign the joint communique, we're not going to after all.
I think there's a level of unpredictability which makes that kind of is who Trump has become, and I think that's what keeps people on their toes. But the interesting thing to me isn't so much the tweets or the other distractions that occur, if you will, but rather the results. And if you look at what has happened, and I know everyone's focused on the president's style and, not adhering to traditional protocols and norms, but the results that he gets, and you look at that communique, you've got all of the G7 talking about the need to reduce tariffs and other aspects of the president's agenda. So the interesting thing, and that gets overlooked, is the results that he gets that will ultimately benefit U.S. companies and workers is a lower tariff rate for our products going into the G7 countries.
A very fair point. At the same time, to get to where he wants to go, whether it's with the G7 or whether it's with China or whether it's with Kim Jong-un, at some point he has to have an agreement. And does he really undercut his credibility if people can't believe that once he makes a commitment, he'll stick to it? Because in the G7 situation, it appears he made a commitment, we're going to go with this communique, and then changed his mind.
Right, and I understand that. I think part of this is to try to understand that that's what makes Trump different than prior leaders, if you will, is that he is non-traditional, he's impulsive, he's a disruptor, and I think that that's what keeps these leaders on their toes. And all of the noise aside, he's been getting results economically for our country, our workers, and our businesses, and that's what I think we should sometimes pull back and focus on a little bit more.
So what was the point of the president talking about bringing Russia back into the G7, which, of course, was expelled for its annexation of Crimea? I mean, as press secretary, you had to deal with those allegations of Russia collusion. Is the president hurting himself by just creating more noise here?
Well, obviously, I don't speak for the president anymore, and I don't know what's the inside thinking on this. But my guess would be that if you're going to have a meeting talking about the economic powers, there is a certain validity to having Russia there. I understand the concerns that until Russia, with the current concerns of Russia interfering with our election and continuing to do so, that we're rewarding them by bringing them back into the G8, if you will. But at current, I think that the president's view is if we're going to have a meeting and talk about the economic state of being and reducing tariffs and other economic things that we all face, as well as some other national security issues in terms of ISIS, Syria, and other things, it makes sense to have one of the players that's involved on all of those subjects in the room. So, I'm not sure that you can. I don't think you can necessarily have a big discussion if you don't have one of the players there. But I also understand that we don't need to be rewarding them. So there should be a way to figure out how do we get them back involved, but make sure that some degree of punishment is maintained, or make them do something as a means to get back into the G8.
So given the fragile relationship right now with its G7 allies, how much leverage has the president lost going into the summit with Kim Jong-un?
Well, I actually look at it quite the opposite. And if based on what I just said, if you look at what he's done, first of all, I don't buy into this theory that you can't have disagreements with your friends. At the end of the day, we are, whether it's Canada to our north or some of our European friends, that we can't have a healthy relationship with them and yet point out disagreements that we have economically. I mean, the fact of the matter is that most of their products come into the U.S., whether it's tariff or non-tariff barriers. They have massive market access to the U.S. economy, and yet when we send our products and services abroad, we face, stiff tariffs in many of their markets. So I think the president's right for looking after American companies and workers. That I don't necessarily think undermines the overall relationship and friendship and allies that we have. That being said, I think if you're Kim, you look at the president and say, for all the talk, this guy actually got things done. So you realize that on a lot of these fronts, that when you pull back the curtain, he's getting real results for the American people. And that's what I think any smart observer would recognize.
Sean, we just are on the eve of this historic summit right now over in Singapore. This has become, if it wasn't before, it's become a major priority for President Trump. Clearly, certainly for the first term, this is going to be one of the things he really wants to accomplish. Why is that? What does he want to accomplish? Set the stage for us. What does he think he can get done over there?
Well, I think obviously the ultimate goal is the denuclearization of the peninsula. And the question is, what kind of concrete steps can the president achieve to see that done, whether it's inspections or a reduction in firing or a de-escalation of some of where they were going prior to this with some of their tests. So I think there's a lot that can get done. I think the key is to have a solid, credible work plan that is transparent, allows inspections in, gets us some idea of what the stockpile and the capabilities are of their weaponry, and then figure out how we trade them in terms of both sanctions and market access for agreeing to give up that. The thing that I think is fascinating, David, is this. There was just footage of Kim Jong-un walking through Singapore. One of the things that gets often overlooked in this is the fact that as he walks around, I mean, this is probably one of the longest flights he's taken. He lands in this place, he gets motorcaded around, and he looks around, he looks up, he goes through this tour, he sees buildings, economic growth, and he sees people out there consuming goods, and all of the commercial aspects are there. Probably things he's never really seen in person before to that extent. And I think there's a way that he looks at that and says, if I do the following, this kind of economy, this kind of growth, this kind of community can be ours if we embrace a work plan to get rid of our nukes. Because the nukes are only so good. At the end of the day, the only way that there's a clear path to economic growth for the North Korean people is that if he is able to do something that will take the economic sanctions off and allow people to trade with the North Korean people.
So this is a fascinating take on it, Sean, and it's consistent with some of the things that President Trump has said, that we're going to make it a more prosperous nation, that commercialization and economics will really overcome. But does it work in this context? Because those nuclear weapons keep him in power, Kim Jong-un, and maybe even keep him alive. Is it realistic to say, we're going to give you a lot of commercial benefits and you give up your military strength, given that's what keeps his regime going?
Right. I think that's the million-dollar question. But by him personally being able to walk the streets of Singapore and look up and look around and say, the only way I'll ever get this is that if I cut a deal.
He was raised in Europe, though. I mean, he's seen all of the prosperity abroad. I mean,
I understand, but there's a big difference. I think that when he walks around Singapore, it's been a while.
Are you concerned that other countries, given the warming relationship between the U.S. and North Korea, could feel that they don't need to enforce existing sanctions anymore? Say China. We are hearing that more North Korean seafood is appearing in China.
Well, I think everybody, whether it's China, Japan, South Korea, everyone else in that region would feel a lot safer and sleep better at night knowing that there was a plan to get rid of the nuclear weapons there. So again, I think it's trust but verify. There's a big deal. Getting a deal and enforcing that deal are quite two different things. So I think, but more than anything else, more than prosperity or economic prosperity, I think we all want to feel safe at home and know that we can sleep well at night. And the denuclearization of that peninsula should be foremost in everybody's mind, whether you live on the peninsula or in the Asian region or in parts of the United States these days. So ultimately, if that's the goal that can be achieved, then I think it's to everybody's benefit. I understand that I don't think there's anybody that doesn't want success here.